Cultivating Joy Through Street Data. My name is Carol Ann Paul. I'm the manager for state and federal programs and special populations. And I did have a co-host today. However, let's keep Kai and her family in our thoughts and prayers as she had a death in her family and she won't be joining us today. But know that, Kai is certainly part of this presentation. So this session is going to focus on reimagining our ways of thinking about data. I'm going to give you some turnkey strategies for really uplifting the voices of students and parents and teachers to really disrupt some of the inequities that are within our school systems. So we're really looking to have that liberating, humanizing, and healing experience with data. During our time together, we're going to go over shifting mindsets. We are going to review the book, Street Data, and we're going to provide some ways to collect street data. And I'm also going to give some real life examples of analyzing street data, what to collect, and even how to collect it. So typically I would not read a slide verbatim, but given the importance of this message and also possibly that I might be your drive home today, I'm going to go ahead and read it. So this is an invitation to a brave space. Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world, and we all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. And in this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow with responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect, and it will not always be what we wish it to be. But it will be our brave space together, and we'll work on it side by side. To set the tone for our journey together, I want to express my intentions. So as a white woman, I'm approaching this summer blitz with humility, and I want to shift the focus away from my own perspective. And just as the poem suggests, right, like I've experienced some wounds, but I've also inflicted some wounds as well. So today, my goal is to really elevate the efforts of others and to really step back, kind of acting as a collaborator rather than the central figure. And as we move forward, you're going to hear me cite many scholars that have been actively working for social justice and racial justice as well. So let's talk about cultivating joy through street data. I want you to think about that term used right in the name of our session today. Cultivating joy through street data. What does that mean? So to cultivate is about really trying to acquire or develop something. And in this case, we're trying to cultivate joy. So today, one of our goals is to grow joy. Now, how can we go about growing that joy? Well, I'm suggesting that we grow joy through street data. Now, joy and data are not often posed right in the same sentence, but what if I told you that the data we have deemed most valuable might not be? So in the book Street Data, the authors really tell us about things like achievement gap, subgroup, and grades. Many of these things are so ingrained into our systems, and they're deemed to be the most important, so important that our educational community is actually playing into or justifying the exclusion of some people and also the inequities as well. How might we shift our mindsets, right, to decenter things like grades or fixing the achievement gap to be kind of new ways of looking at data? I really believe that data can be humanizing, and it can also serve our schools as well. So Dr. Skelton of the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center, she suggested that we shift our thinking from fixing the achievement gap to creating and sustaining school conditions that are just and inclusive. So ultimately, our goal is to increase outcomes for all students. So instead of reducing the achievement gap, we would be focusing on things like increasing access, increasing representation, and then also making sure that all students can meaningfully participate. And again, when we do these things, what are they going to result in? High outcomes for our school communities, which is exactly what we want. So I want you to take a look at the slide, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to digest. And then in the chat, can you describe how equity is showing up in each of these models? So we have our continuous improvement model, our whole child model, and then we also have systems thinking. How is equity being lifted throughout? So some people from the chat had noticed that equity looks like it's being sought after. Oh, everyone is given the time that they need to move their own bar forward, right? So we're meeting them where they're at. It's a continuous cycle. I love this. Someone said that it's a focus on community, right? And so some of the themes that are being lifted is that we're going to meet people where they're at, right? We're going to make sure that we give everyone opportunities, the environment, and also the supports that they need in order to allow them to be successful. So where does our focus need to be? Well, again, I want to go back to Dr. Skelton's work, and this is what she had mentioned. Educational improvement efforts should really focus on transforming school systems into equity-centered learning organizations. So the last few slides that I just reviewed, that's really the heart of the book for street data, right? The authors of street data pose this question: why do we rely on current forms of data? And what would happen if we shifted the focus from those current forms and we embraced a brand new model? So the book offers us 3 beliefs to guide our journey. A belief that data can be humanizing, that it can liberate us. Data can be a liberatory experience, and that data can also heal us. So we're using and thinking about data in different ways. In order to transform our educational systems, the author argues that we should be focusing on perhaps level 3 street data, and that we focus a lot on satellite data, which is level 1, or map data, which is considered level 2, but that we really need to get boots on the ground and hear from the actual people who are having the experiences, perhaps in our schools or in our classrooms. So I want to explain a little bit about what these particular sets of data, what you might see if you were experiencing perhaps satellite data. When we refer to level 1 satellite data, we're essentially talking about obtaining that comprehensive aerial perspective of like classroom or school or maybe even the educational system. This data really helps us to understand trends, maybe related to student achievement, could be equity, it could be teacher quality, it could be perhaps teacher retention, and it really serves as a starting point. This kind of data kind of makes you go, that's really what that data does, because it really exemplifies or maybe puts a focus on some of the trends that might be happening over the course of years. Some examples of this data might include things like MSTEP or PSAT or SAT. Sometimes also attendance records or graduation rates and so on. So let's look at what I mean by that aerial perspective. So this video was created using Google Earth Pro, and it does provide a remarkably detailed view. However, it's really essential to consider whether you're truly engaging with the environment, right? So while you can observe long-term phenomenon, right, such as like erosion or alterations in the river's course, a more profound experience of the Grand Canyon, which is what you're seeing here, requires a deeper level of exploration. Even though we can get quite deep in there, right? Like you can see that Google Earth Pro can really give us some varied pictures of the Grand Canyon. We need to make sure that we're not just using that one type or that one view. This is what maybe that aerial view would look like if we were to take maybe a shot of Lake Mead. So Lake Mead in the year 2000, you can see where the river bed lies. In 2022, again, that riverbed has changed again, right? When we're looking at satellite data, this often triggers a sense of like curiosity, making us pause and think, what's happening here? I need a more detailed examination. Well, that brings us to level 2 data, and we're getting closer to the ground here, okay? Where we want to really collect specific map data. We want to pinpoint things like decoding and fluency and multiplying fractions, and we gather this information through things like maybe running records or anecdotal notes or common assessments, right? Like DRA. And map data includes perception and satisfaction surveys as well from parents or students or staff. And this data really guides us in a more focused direction, and it provides a more comprehensive view. But it still falls short of what's needed in order to drive equitable change effectively. All right, so let's continue using that Lake Mead example. So level 2 data might include mapping the changes in the water level over the course of several months. So instead of looking at that aerial view, you're now a little bit closer and you're tracking water levels, okay? But we still haven't interacted necessarily. And that brings us to street level, where we're going to gain a closer hands-on perspective to really directly observe and listen and collect real life experiences from the students that we serve, or the communities that we serve, or the teachers in our schools. So, street data is really qualitative, and it should adopt an asset based approach. We're going to focus on emphasizing things like our strengths of our students, the strengths of our schools, and the strengths of our communities, instead of fixating on weaknesses. Utilizing street data really enables us to challenge, right, the dangers of adopting a single narrative. So let's take a look at what it would look like if we were to adopt a street level approach and think about Lake Mead again. We would take to the streets and we would collect street level data. And we would venture into that community directly impacted by the shrinking shoreline of Lake Mead. And our approach really would involve actively engaging with the community by stepping onto the streets, figuratively and sometimes literally. And here we would initiate conversations, we would conduct interviews, and we would pose relevant questions to that community to figure out what was happening and what were they experiencing in their own voice. And the objective here is really to collect firsthand experiences, perspectives, their opinions, and what's happening within that community. This is street data. What I'm proposing is that street data is what perhaps we should focus on instead of maybe focusing on some of those other level data so much. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at them at all, but I'm saying that what we need to do is to make sure that we don't discount the qualitative data that we can acquire perhaps through talking to others, talking to those who are actually experiencing things, and capturing their stories in their own words. We know everybody has a story to tell, but are we listening to those stories or are we silencing those stories? So, only recognizing and sharing those stories is one way that we can really help a multitude of voices to be heard. We really honor the stories of the whole child when we go to them and we ask them, what are you experiencing? I am going to give you 10 examples of how to possibly gather some data. There is a QR code on this screen as well, but I'm going to place a link in the chat. So there are various ways that we might consider collecting street data. Some of the ways that we can shift from the more prominent types of data to street data is being intentional about it. Listening campaigns is one way in particular that we might be able to do that. That would involve, right, doing some interviewing of students, shadow a student. So ask a student if you can be their shadow for the day and go through multiple classes with them to see what they experience. Home visits is another way. the audio feedback interviews. So there are multiple of ways that we can collect perspective, we can collect experiences from the people that we serve or from the students that we serve. Can you share any experiences or strategies that you have used in order to glean information from maybe your students in the classroom? Feel free to unmute or to place those experiences in the chat.
Carol, my district just we worked last year on new MTSS framework. So we took everything that the adults had come up with, and brought in a sampling of students, a group from sixth grade. I'm in the middle. I'm housed in the middle school. I work for the district. I'm the DEI coordinator for the district, but I brought in at the middle school a group of sixth graders, a group of seventh graders, and then a group of eighth graders all separately, and gave them the work that we had done and let them provide us with feedback. And then we took the feedback back and made some changes to the expectations and the consequences and all of the work that we had done on the MTSS model based on the feedback we had gotten from students.
That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that for your students. They're now going to be much more, I guess, let's say, into the process, right? So they're going to buy in much more, but also you've now changed what you were doing to be more student centered. Whenever we use student voice, it helps us to become more student centered. Now, I want to share a couple of other ways, maybe that I have done some of this work too. So I wanted to know at a staff meeting, and I use comment cards because, of course, that is one way in order to collect some of this street data. We asked staff, share a bright spot in your experience when teaching at, and I'm calling it XYZ Elementary School, okay? And when you ask adults these questions, you have to make sure that you're thinking about why might this question be important for staff to answer? Or how is this going to help us to be maybe more student focused or perhaps more staff focused as well? And then additionally, how can we protect the identities of those who answered, right? We want to make sure that we collect the data, but then we also have to have it be stripped of all of its identities so that people don't know who has said what. This is what teachers said. They said, our teachers. Someone said, my work bestie. How about my work village? My colleagues, the other fifth grade teachers, my grade mates. What patterns are you seeing just from that data? How powerful is that if you were, let's say, maybe a principal, or if you were a parent working on maybe a PTO? This is really important to know about this particular staff. What do they find as a bright spot? They find their coworkers as a bright spot. Okay, so why? Why do they find their coworkers as a bright spot? Well, they feel a sense of camaraderie with them. They trust each other. And this person said, we're more than just colleagues, we're friends. They understand the experiences in the classroom. We all bring something to the table. I get energy from my ex village or from my ex family, from our little village. And notice that I took some of the identifiers out so that you didn't know, right, what school that represented. We're a tight-knit building. That's the thing. We all teach the exact same lesson plans because as a team, we plan lessons together. Let's see, we're there for each other. We're all in the same boat. We're working with the same students and dealing with the same types of struggles. So, to lean on each other is very helpful so that you know that you're not going crazy. That's why it was really important for them. So what can we glean from that? That's a bright spot. For me, I would definitely give teachers in this building an opportunity multiple times in multiple different ways to work with each other. Why? Because it sounds like they lean on each other for to gain energy, but also to gain resources. And when people use words like my little village or my family, it means that they have had some sort of emotional connection to the people that they work with, and they rely on them probably for some of those really tough and challenging times where you need to lean on somebody so that you can express some of your emotions to somebody else, right? Might want to change a schedule or two, or make sure that the PD that you put forth, of course, is very collaborative in nature. So, what can we glean? We can change some policy. We might be able to change some practice. So, recognizing and really valuing differences is reflected in instruction, policy, leadership structures, practices, climate, environment. How about assessment methods, right? So, what factors might the data collected influence? Well, it could influence policy around calendars and the way that calendars are structured. It might affect leadership structures or practices, and it might even affect things like when PLCs will be structured and how they will be held. And so data can be healing, right? And it can be used in various ways in order to shape and affect some change, right? In a positive direction. Again, I asked a strength based question, right? All right, let's flip the dashboard then. What if I asked a student this or a parent this? Same question, what might it influence? What do you think that students might say? And always we want to be thinking about how can we protect the identities of those who answer, right? We want to strip all the identifiers off of it. So recognizing and valuing differences, right? Which factor might the data collected influence based on student or parent answers? What do you guys think? What do you think maybe your students might say? What are the bright spots? What do you think they might say? So someone said family. Students maybe might say that the bright spot in their day are friends. They might say family. They might say pets. It could be. What if they said recess? That would be okay too. That allows us to enact maybe some structural changes within the day in order to include those bright spots. Or how about having more collaboration in the classroom? If a running pattern is that they really want to be with their friends, and the bright spot of coming to school is being with their friends, what if they said their teachers? What does that mean? And how can that data maybe influence some of these things like policy, practices, climate, and environment for our students? Someone else wrote PE, art, and music. Hooray, right? Students definitely would say that they love PE, art, and music. That's something that could perhaps be a pattern or a trend. All right, so now let's talk about ways we can collect street data from families, okay? So this is a quick little graphic that I made thinking about when we collect data from our families, which families do we want to collect data from? Now, there is definitely value in collecting data from the families who come every day and who volunteer at every party or volunteer to chaperone at every single thing. There's definitely some validity in that. I don't want to knock that. But I also want to make sure that I'm reaching out and I'm talking to the families who might not come, who might not be able to be engaged in that way with the school, right? They're engaging at home with school, but they might not actually physically be coming to some of the things at school. And so they're engaging in school in a different way. So, in order to help us build trusting relationships, we really need to understand our community better. We really need to understand our parents better, right? So, we can do this. And I'm going to put this in the chat for you as well. This is an infographic that I made on Canva. So, I'm going to grab that for you. So, we can do audio feedback with them as well. We could do a listening campaign. We could perhaps do a home visit if they invited us in, right? We could do empathy interviews. We could still do perception surveys for sure. That's really important to do. In a listening campaign, I would suggest more than one family. We have to make sure that we're collecting from multiple families if we're going to do a listening campaign. Strip the identifiers to make sure that we don't know which family is from which, right? We don't know their answers. We won't be able to identify any of that stuff. And then we can look at some of the patterns and trends, right, with those listening campaigns. So there's really a way to empower people through voice, right? Relationships are the cornerstone to family engagement. We all know that. And so there is also a list of data collection questions that I'm suggesting for you as well. So again, that's a QR code on the screen. But knowing that relationships are the cornerstone of family engagement, we might want to ask some of these questions. I thought that these were really interesting. Like, how long have families lived in the neighborhoods or had children attending the school district? Who are the leaders that influence different communities? And what if we asked our families what the bright spots were of coming to school? All of these things will really help us to empower their voice. All right, so how do we really build or establish authentic partnerships with our families and communities? This time, I want you to pretend like you are going to, like you're on a listening campaign. Okay, so we're gonna pretend like you were the qualitative researcher and you are going to gather a bit of data from this particular parent, right? You've scheduled this interview over Zoom and you're going to collect some information. So we want you to write down as many notes as you can, and we're going to think around what is the parent ultimately telling us. And I do have Tamika. She has raised her hand. Ms. Medley, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah,
So all of these seem like great tools
yeah,
so that we can gather this information to learn more about our families. But I know sometimes I'm overwhelmed with the
yes.
amount of surveys and this and that. So how do we
Hmm.
collect the data or gather the data without being a nuisance or a pest to our family?
Right. And sometimes when we're trying to collect from them, we kind of act like a little bug, right? We're like, fill out this survey, fill out this survey. So I'm thinking that one of the ways we might want to do that is to find out kind of naturally where we can get some information from our families. Like, for example, are we able to add comment cards in the local grocery store? Can we add something to some of the churches that we know many of our families attend? Another way might be to select a couple of families from, let's say that you have 8 fifth-grade classrooms, and you're going to each collect 2 families, and then you're going to throw all of your data into one pot and you're going to mix it up and you're going to find patterns and trends between those 8 classrooms. Now I've only tapped, a couple of families from my classroom, but I also have data from 7 other classrooms as well. And as a team, we can collect and hear our families in that way. Tamika, what do you
Uh,
think about those things?
yeah, I
And
think
did I
that's
say your
great.
name right? I just want to make sure. Did I say your name right?
You did.
Oh, good.
And yeah, I thought that was a great idea to just have a bunch of different teachers tap into just a couple of kids. So I hadn't thought of
Mhm,
it like that because
mhm.
it can be overwhelming sometimes, but I think I would think it wouldn't be overwhelming. But like you said, you can still gather the data that you need to move forward. Thank you.
Of course. Let's go ahead and take a look at the video. We're going to pretend like we are qualitative researchers. What can we glean from this parent?
Well, immediately after the home visit, I was then invited to a back to school night they were having in Stanton. They gave me the little flyer. I was like, well, we're having a back to school night. It's from this time and this time. Bring the kids, like a meet and greet the teachers and everyone that was going to be there. But one thing I can say about, Stanton period is that it is constant communication, something I never had, something I completely enjoy. And it's not just negative communication, it's constant positive communication. I can be here at home, at work, anywhere, and one of my teachers would send me a text. Or I used to love it, Miss Lucas would send pictures, take pictures of them doing classwork, and she said, see, look how my daughter, Tanae, well, I call her Bird. The school calls her Bird, which I love because it's like a community. They adopted her nickname. So she would send me a text like, look at Bird. She's having a wonderful day today. and she's doing good. But in saying that, that allowed me to hear. It put a trust. I put a trust in Miss Lucas for doing that. So no matter what she said, how she had to say it, what the information is, it made it easier for me to receive it from her, because she had built this communication, this trust that I never had. You know, so I tell people now, friendship. You know what I'm saying? We're not friends to talk every single day, but she's a person that I will always hold in a high regard. She will always have my respect. I really respect Miss Lucas, and I value her so much, because not just her, but all the teachers, but like she was the first one to really extend herself to me. And I would get the text, and then one day Tanae had a bad day, and she called me, and I was expecting to hear something good. Oh, you know, she got good on her test, so she did read. And she was like, well, we had a bit of an issue today. I'm like, for real? What happened? Well, you know, Tanae did X, Y, and Z. And I didn't get defensive. I didn't get, well, what do you do? Or what I actually sat back and I listened, and I received the information, you know, and I processed the information. For me, that was something different, because at that point in time, I felt it like, why am I not getting mad? Because normally when you call me on the phone and you telling me something about my child did this, I'm naturally on the defense, like, well, what did you do to make my child do this? Or who was messing with her in class, because my baby's a good baby. But in this time, it was different. And I don't know, it's because of the positive, you know, feedback she gives me every day, the friendship we brought. It just made, when she was telling me what was going on, I took a breath, I stopped, and I listened. You know, and then I was like, we actually got to a page where we worked together. I said, well, you know what, since she's having a bad day, you know, can you put her on the phone? You know, and I spoke with her on the phone, and I let her know that me and Miss Lucas are working together. We are a team, you know, and if she asks you to do something, you need to treat it as if mommy is asking you to do something. So if she asks you to sit down, you need to sit down. And there was no more problems with Tanae.
All right, I'm going to take a moment for you to reflect. What is a bright spot for this parent about this school? So just take a moment for you to write and reflect, and then we'll be back. Okay, so I'm going to frame the context of this. This is a parent who doesn't necessarily come to all of the back to school nights. She might not come to parent teacher conferences every single day, but she is still supporting the school from home and with her words and with her actions. What are some of the bright spots that you noticed when you listened to that parent? There were so many things, right? I mean, I was writing like crazy.
I really like the way the interview went, and she explained how, because of the positive communication that she trusted, and built a relationship with the teacher. And I think what stood out to me that I never really thought about was her thought process when she did get that call, about her daughter maybe not following directions, and what parents might be thinking when they get that call. But because the trust was there, what stood out to me was she said, I didn't get defensive. And I was like, oh, I never thought parents would even have that thought process. I just thought immediately they just want to hear what the action was, and I'll talk to them when they get home. But I never would have thought that they were thinking maybe what did the teacher do, or what did other kids do, and so on. So I don't know, I really enjoyed the.
Now, think about if we were able to have more parent voices, and then we looked at patterns between all of the parents' voices who may be engaging in school in a little bit different way than what perhaps we think engaging in school means, right? So then we can find the parents at the margins, and we have all this data that is collected. Perhaps we've done it as a team. We can look through those patterns and find out, how are these parents engaging with our school? What do they think the bright spots are? And how can we take this strength and we can magnify it, right? And make this work for them as well. We've had some people place some things in the chat that were wonderful. Constant parent communication not just on academic, but the overall success for the student, parent-friendly communication. So someone gleaned some of that information from the interview. Another person wrote, she trusts her child's teacher and the school. Another person wrote, communication is consistent and positive. Someone else lifted trust, respect, and collaboration were important for mom. And when she felt that, oh, that's so important, right? She reciprocated it during a very challenging moment. We need to establish positive communication with parents in the beginning of the school year. Of course, yes. Take the time to email, right? So you can email, you can pick up that phone, you could do a Zoom, you can do messages, a balance between technology, but also having, some of those more intimate moments when you're opening the car door, maybe putting the child in if that is an option at your school. I've noticed that other people have talked about the trustworthy relationships, working as a team to home and school, great communication, positive experience. It looks like someone else wrote, street data creates a feeling of empowerment by having their thoughts and voices heard among family, friends, peers, and stakeholders. And we have to provide those safe opportunities for everyone to be heard. Excellent, great communication. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to place in the chat now, let's say that we do get that information. Now, what do we do with or in conjunction with those families? Well, one thing is to create a powerful partnership plan, but you can't do it alone. You have to then again invite those families back in order to build out the powerful partnership plan. Because even though the words that we heard, we think we interpreted them correctly, one way to get feedback about that or to check your understanding is to ask parents to come and partner and build out perhaps a plan, do some sort of action with them. So not for them, we're doing everything with them. This is a good way in order to kind of member check. Did we get what we were looking for? Did we get the gist of what they were saying, right? And of course, with great power comes great responsibility. So this data has to be treated and contained in a sensitive manner, removing all identifiers so as not to harm anyone who has actually opened up and given that information, right? So we have some more resources for you, of course, using a bit.ly. We also have that QR code. Actually, Kai Smith created this wakelet, and she put in a couple of data protocols. She put in some of the information about the 3 levels of data, even a student voice and feedback form. So the last thing that I wanted to share with you was this quote. How does this quote relate to the topic that we discussed today? What connections are you making? And what's the first bit of information that you think you might want to collect regarding street data? Feel free to add anything in the chat. We just have a final few minutes here before our time is up. I hope that you've received something of value today, something that you can take back either into your classroom or into your schools, into your community, into your churches, into your groups, wherever you are. There's always a place for voices to be heard. There's always a place for street data. So thank you so much for coming today. If there's anything else that you'd like to share in the chat, maybe some of the connections that you've had or any connections that you're making to the quote, we would love to hear it. I hope you have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Thank you, everyone. I'm feeling the love in the chat. Thank you. Appreciate it.